Hey, welcome. Today we're tackling a big topic, vaccine side effects. But we're going to come at it from a different angle, focusing on one massive, often overlooked side effect. And to do that, we're going to have to cut through all the noise online and just look at the cold, hard data. What's the real risk of a vaccine versus the disease it's designed to stop?
So let's just ask it straight up. Are vaccines dangerous or are they protective? It's a question that can feel, well, impossible to answer, right? You go online and it's just this sea of conflicting stories. It's really, really hard to know what's true and what's just designed to scare you. You know, the biggest fears you hear about are things like severe allergic reactions, permanent disabilities, or even death. And look, it's true. Vaccines, like any medicine, can have side effects. But, and this is the important part, the real key is understanding the scale of that risk. How likely is it really? So let's actually look at the numbers. Okay, but before we can even talk about vaccines, we first need to understand our own body's incredible built-in defense force, the immune system. I mean, seriously, think of it like this super sophisticated army inside you, ready to defend you 24/7. So when some serious invader, like a virus, gets into your body, this army just launches an immediate counterattack. You've got your frontline soldiers that engage right away. Then these amazing smart cells gather intel on the attacker. They figure out what it looks like, what its weaknesses are. Then they activate weapons factories to produce these perfectly targeted antibodies. But here's the absolute most brilliant part. After the battle is won, your immune system creates memory cells. Think of them as veteran soldiers. They remember the enemy's face for years. So if that same invader ever dares to show up again, bam, they crush it immediately. And that is how you get long-term immunity. So the big question is, how do we get those amazing memory cells without having to fight a full-blown, potentially deadly war inside our bodies every time? Well, that is the absolute genius of vaccines. They're basically a dress rehearsal for your immune system. Yeah, to put it simply, a vaccine is just a really clever way to trick your body into making those all-important memory cells. It gives your immune system a safe target to practice on, so you learn how to defeat a specific enemy, and you get that immunity without ever having to actually suffer through the real disease. And the way they do this is by introducing a totally harmless version of the attacker. It could be a killed germ, or a super weakened one, or sometimes just a tiny piece of one. It's not enough to make you sick, but it is enough to trigger that whole natural immune response we just talked about. Identify, build weapons, and, this is the whole point, create that memory. It's like a training exercise that gives you protection for years, sometimes for your entire life. Okay, let's get right to the heart of it now. We're going to do a little thought experiment, and this is all based on real-world data. We're going to compare the risks of getting measles, which is, by the way, one of the most contagious diseases on the planet, against the risks of getting the vaccine for it. So just imagine a world with good, modern healthcare, but for some reason, nobody vaccinates against measles. So what happens if 10 million unvaccinated kids in this world catch measles? Let's break down the numbers. Right off the bat, out of those 10 million kids, a staggering 600,000 would develop pneumonia. And pneumonia is the single deadliest complication of measles. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of kids in the hospital, literally fighting for their lives. And it doesn't stop there. On top of that, another 10,000 children would get encephalitis. That's a really dangerous inflammation of the brain. It can lead to permanent brain damage, deafness, or lifelong intellectual disabilities. And the final, just tragic outcome? Around 20,000 of those 10 million kids would die from measles. That is the real cost of this disease, even in a modern society, if we don't vaccinate. Okay, so that's one side of the coin. Now let's flip the script completely. What if, instead of getting sick, we vaccinate those same 10 million kids with the MMR vaccine? That's the one for measles, mumps, and rubella. What are the risks now? So look at this. The difference here is just staggering. Let's take brain inflammation, encephalitis. With the measles infection, you get 10,000 cases. With the vaccine, about 10. 10. Or look at total severe consequences. That's everything bad combined. It plummets from 2.5 million children down to about 120. And deaths? We go from 20,000 to statistically pretty much zero. I mean, the data couldn't be clearer. The disease itself is thousands of times more dangerous than the vaccine. And, you know, we have to talk about this directly. The fear that vaccines cause autism, That all came from a single, totally fraudulent study. It's been debunked, disproven, and retracted. And since then, countless massive, global studies have looked for a link and found nothing. The scientific and medical consensus on this is overwhelming. It is as clear as day. Vaccines do not cause autism. This really gets at the idea of relative risk. And a great way to think about it is like a seatbelt. I mean, is it possible to be harmed by a seatbelt in some kind of freak accident? Technically, yes, though it's incredibly rare. But does that mean it's safer to just not wear one? No way. Of course not. The protection it offers so far outweighs that tiny risk. It's the exact same logic with vaccines. But it's not just about protecting yourself. Let's zoom out and see how this individual choice actually protects our entire community. And this is where we get to the really beautiful concept of herd immunity. So what is herd immunity? Well, it's what happens when a huge percentage of a population is immune to a disease. When that happens, the disease just can't spread effectively. It runs into dead ends everywhere. This creates a kind of protective firewall that shields the most vulnerable people in our society. You know, newborn babies who are too young to be vaccinated, or cancer patients, or anyone with a compromised immune system. They literally rely on the rest of us to keep them safe. And for a virus that's as crazy contagious as measles, that threshold for protection is incredibly high. We're talking at least 95% of the population needs to be immune to really stop it in its tracks. And when vaccination rates start to dip below that 95% line, that firewall we talked about starts to break down. And that's when you see these horrible outbreaks come roaring back. So let's bring it all together. We've looked at how our amazing immune system works, we've walked through the hard data in our thought experiment, and we've seen the power of community protection. So, what is the biggest, most significant side effect of vaccines? The answer is actually really simple. It's profound. And it's the one thing that gets totally lost in all the noise and all the debates. The single most important side effect of vaccines is a decrease in the number of dead children. That's it. That's the bottom line. Vaccines have saved more lives than pretty much any other single invention in human history. They are one of the most powerful tools we have, ever, to prevent unbelievable suffering and just let kids grow up healthy. And that really brings us to one final question, doesn't it? The incredible success of vaccines means that most of us have completely forgotten just how terrifying these diseases really were. So, as the people who have benefited from this medical miracle, what's our responsibility to make sure these forgotten monsters don't come back? Something to think about. Thanks for walking.